We are talking The Guardian from 1990. And this one is directed by William Friedkin of The Exorcist fame and stars Jenny Seagrove. Now, this movie had a troubled production. There were many script rewrites. The original director, Sam Raimi, actually dropped out of this, and even lead actress Jenny Seagrove was not happy with it. But what is the story of The Guardian? Well, we have some text at the beginning explaining that druids worshipped trees, and for the most part they were good, but there are those who are worship evil trees. And it seems in modern or 1990 Los Angeles, it focuses on a couple who are just having a baby, and they want to hire a nanny. So they go through a few different kind of interview process, and they decide on Jenny Seagrove's character, Camilla, who is this pretty English nanny. And she actually turns out to be something a little different. She seems to be possibly some type of supernatural entity that worships this kind of gnarly tree out in the kind of the woods and is sacrificing babies to this tree. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's discuss what works in this movie. Now, despite some of the kind of the behind the scenes troubles with this film, I do think this has some entertainment value. It's not really like a roller coaster movie by any stretch. It's quite a slower, talky movie in some aspects, but it is peppered with some good, great scenes. I mean, we have a scene where we have three kind of like troublemakers try to molest Jenny Seagrove's character while she is looking after the baby, and they meet a grisly fate. There's a couple of great sequences where we, the character is kind of revealed to our protagonist, and she kind of is doing supernatural stuff. There's a scene where she's kind of flying through the woods. It's great because she's like a silhouette, this kind of figure kind of flying through the woods, running after or flying after our kind of our main protagonist. And even some smaller moments where you just feel Friedkin's kind of touch is on there, and has some kind of like uncomfortable kind of sequences, even though for the most part they may seem somewhat kind of nondescript, but he makes them feel a little bit sort of creepy at times. We have like a POV shot where she's kind of giving a baby these toys, and there's this bunny called Pie Wacket and stuff, and there's just a few sequences like that I kind of think would have worked well. I actually think Jenny Seagrove's quite alluring as this softly spoken, very polite kind of English nanny, and she's kind of quite sexy in a kind of like waif, kind of fae type way. So that's it almost has a kind of erotic thriller vibe to it to some degree. And actual, the actual kind of concept of this minus the sort of supernatural element was seen a couple of years later in The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, which kind of has a sort of similar setup, just without the kind of the supernatural element, a kind of that sort of thing. So, I do think there is some entertainment value to be had here, and the movie, although I would never say it's outright scary, there are some creepy moments in it, I do think, and part of that I think is down to Seagrove's performance, but also Friedkin's direction, and just again the general eeriness of this kind of somewhat unknown entity. And then we have the kind of the actual this evil tree itself, and it's a little bit over the top possibly. You wonder how no one has kind of stumbled upon this. It's got kind of like baby faces that are coming out of it and stuff, and it's like a big tree not that far out in the woods. It's so you would think someone would have come across it by now, but it still looks kind of quite gnarly, and a kind of a killer tree sequence. I think it always kind of would be quite fun. Kind of give you there's certain Evil Dead 2 vibes here, I would suggest. So if you're a fan of that kind of end sequence of Evil Dead 2, there's some other stuff kind of going on here. There's also a few kind of nods to other horror movies and just kind of little references, which I kind of found quite fun. I think the performances are all fairly good, to be honest. I mean, Jenny Seagrove is the standout, but everyone here I think does at least a perfectly adequate job, if not kind of outstanding in any particular kind of way. So it's kind of watchable in that regard. So what doesn't work for me, I think the concept of this druid kind of like text that we get at the beginning seems to not represent what the actual creature is in the movie, because a druid would suggest it's kind of a human, but this is clearly not a human creature we're dealing with here. And I have to say I found the powers that she might have very ill-defined. She just seems to be able to do like just things, like for example, she kills one particular guy who starts to suspect her, and he's got like blood all over the place, all over his home, and she just kind of waves her hand and all the blood magically disappears. It's like, this seems kind of like a very convenient power, doesn't it, to kind of mop up. And there's no real idea about what she wants to sacrifice these babies to this tree, but there's no real idea about why. I mean, what is the end game? What is she doing? What does the tree, want to become? We're sacrificing to this tree so it can do something, but kind of what? It's not really ever particularly kind of delved into any kind of great depth. I'm presuming it just means the tree needs sacrifices to live, one would assume, but it's kind of like, it's a tree ultimately, and surely that water and photosynthesis and stuff is probably equally important. It doesn't really specify it has to have the babies and things. Anyway, so there's some kind of like elements here that about the kind of mythology and the supernatural elements here that I just found a little bit kind of ill-defined. But even the more corporeal, boring stuff, I suppose, like she's faked all this. When she's in that human form, she's kind of like has all these fake references, and she's got all this kind of like backstory about she's kind of with this agency, and that will all require like admin and paperwork and stuff. And she's like this tree spirit, but she's doing all this kind of admin and things like that to sort of have this kind of paper trail of references and things. It's kind of like, well, this seems to be a very kind of like domesticated tree spirit to a large degree. There you go. So, there's some kind of sillier elements, if we're being kind of honest here. And then we have a sequence towards the end where they know that our protagonists know that this woman means harm, but they have no idea she's something supernatural. And we have a scene in the hospital where Jenny Seagrove's Camilla turns up and tries to take the baby, but they kind of, surely you would try it at that point and subdue her and maybe get her arrested, but they kind of knock her out and run away and drive manically in the kind of the car. And thinking, well, why? You don't know she's supernatural. You just think she's a woman at this point. Surely you would try and get security. So there's just a whole bunch of things here that are just kind of like somewhat kind of ill-conceived, I would suggest. And, it doesn't really seem like it's particularly kind of well sort of strung together. As I've said, there are many kind of rewrites in this movie, so maybe it's a bit more of a hodgepodge movie, and what originally seems somewhat of a thoughtful movie to a degree. It has kind of elements of like a B movie where it hasn't been particularly thought out and it's just kind of like good enough. Some of the kind of the pacing issues here may be some people might find it a little bit too subtle and slow at times. For me, I didn't mind it, to be honest, but I'd be remiss for sort of saying maybe it could have had a bit more to it to a degree. There's a suggestion that she's wanting to sort of flirt with her husband and kind of seduce him, but for what purpose? It's never really. It never really goes anywhere. But it's like, well, what? Surely you would keep your head down if you were wanting to be, you know, undetected, that you had ill intent and stuff. So I think the kind of the writing and the mythology and the way this character is portrayed, although there is some great visuals, I just think it's kind of like, and it has a kind of soap opera feel to it. Certainly the first 2 acts kind of have a soap feel to it, is the best way I would describe it. A little bit kind of like, you know, 90s TV soap, American TV soap feel to it. So to rate this movie, I would say it's about 5 out of 10. It's about kind of an average horror movies. It's watchable to a degree, but it's a little silly, I have to say, and a bit of a waste of a concept. Have you seen The Guardian? Please do let me know what your thoughts are, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.